everybody, and welcome back to the channel and to the series, or if this is your first time, welcome. To follow along with this tutorial, you'll need some custom nodes. Those nodes being the UV grid node, UV brick, value mix, and fader nodes. If you've been following along with the series so far, you should already have all those nodes. If not, you can watch the first few videos of the series as far as episode 5 should do. Or, if you don't have time for that, you can pick up the ready-built nodes from my Blender Market page, where you'll also have the option to purchase the pre-built materials, all the materials that I have created or will create throughout this series, if you don't have time to follow along. In my store, you'll also find my other add-ons, shader packs, and node packs, such as UV Scatter, which is essentially UV Grid on steroids, much more powerful and with many more features, and my rainwater shader system, which adds water and rain effects to your materials. A purchase from my Blender Market store is the perfect way to support me and my work, should you feel inclined to do so. In this video, we'll be revisiting the PBR bricks material. We'll be adding a few new features, and we'll address how we use PBR texture sets, making them much more manageable, and create a new method for blending together PBR sets as layers. So let's get started. Okay, so to begin with, I've imported my two individual PBR texture sets, my usual 5-piece set made up of albedo and ambient occlusion, roughness, height or displacement, and a normal map. The set on the left is known as concrete rough wall, and I'll be using that for my mortar, and the set on the right is brushed concrete, which I'll be using for the surface of the bricks. So I'll grab the left set, drag it a little bit further over to the left for a little more space, and let's get started. I'm going to add a UV map and connect it to all the textures. All the textures, incidentally, are already correctly set as far as color space is concerned. The roughness, height, and normal maps will all want to be in non-color color space. I'll combine the albedo and the ambient occlusion textures with a color mix node, which I'll set to multiply. And I'll use separate RGB nodes for the roughness and for the height. Now I'll move the UV map over to the left a little bit. I'm going to tie together all of these noodles, select all of the nodes, and press Ctrl G to group them together. Okay, I'm going to make a little room to the left of the texture nodes, and I'll add a vector math set to multiply. Set defaults for X and Y to 1, and now I can get rid of this reroute. And we'll use this vector multiply as a scaling method. So let's add a combine X, Y, Z, so we'll take a single value from the input, pass it to both the X and the Y, and multiply both channels in such a way. Let's take care of the outputs. We've got our color output, roughness, a height output, and I'm going to add a fader node for an intensity control, and here is our normal map. Let's give our inputs and outputs some names. I'm going to change input to vector, and X will be scale. For the outputs, I'm going to change color to base color. The second input is the second output, more to the point, is our roughness. The third is our height. And the fourth will be the normal map, so I'm going to leave that as color. Now let's expose a few more height controls through the input node. I'm going to set this fader node to 0.15, so I get a default of 0.15 when I hook this up, and I'll call that FAC the height FAC. So this will control the height intensity of the height map itself. And I'll also add a math node set to add, which I can use as a base height control. So I'll grab another fader. I'll get a default of 0 this time and hook that up, delete my fader, and connect the FAC to the bottom of the add node. This one I'll call base height. And there we have it, a single very handy little node which contains our entire PBR texture set, and all our outputs are ready to go, and we can affect those outputs with the built-in inputs right here. I'll set the scale to 1 so we actually see something. Let's drag that over to be beside our principled shader for a second, and you can see that because of the naming of the outputs, base color, roughness, I've named them to match the inputs of the principled shader, so you can hold Alt and right click and drag between the nodes to automatically connect them up. The height obviously will want to go into a bump node or a displacement node. I'll use bump. And the color of the normal map output will want a normal map node. Color to color, and there we go. Very good. I'm going to do the same thing for the second texture set. It's exactly the same as the first one, so I'll speed this up and I'll see you in a few minutes. There we have it. The second node is complete. Now I'm going to give these nodes some names. We'll call this one brick surface PBR set. And we'll keep that one. And this one will be a mortar PBR set. Now that we have our two PBR texture sets, let's have a look at a new way, well, a new take on the old way of blending together these sets. We do that with a series of mix nodes, beginning with a mix RGB for the base color output. Then we'll use value mix nodes for the roughness and for the height, and a final mix node for the color of our normal maps. And let's group them all together. Hook up our outputs. Let's have a look at the names of the inputs and outputs. Base color. And base color 2. Let me expand this column so you can see the titles a little better. This one will be roughness and roughness 2. And we've got height, followed by height 2, and color, followed by color 2. I'll just add the space. Now the outputs will be base color, roughness, height, and we'll leave color the way it is. Now I'm going to move the inputs around to create groups. So I'll set roughness 1 beside base color 1. Move height up to sit alongside, and the color for the normal map as well. And now, of course, we need a mix factor for all of these mix nodes. We'll create one and use that single input socket to drive all of our blends. And I'm going to move that factor to the middle so it separates our two individual groups. And now again, because of the clever nomenclature of the output sockets, I can Alt and right-click and drag from the mix node to the principled shader, the bump node, and the normal map. And all my connections are made automatically. Let's have a look at what we've got. That's layer 1, and that's layer 2. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to name this node PBR layer mix. And I'm going to keep that one, and I'm also going to keep the mortar PBR set. Very nice. I'm going to move these over to the left a bit. And I'm going to disconnect the normal map so we can see only the height result going into the bump. Because the bump node can be a little misleading in terms of the actual displacement that's happening. It's only a visual representation. You can't actually see the height. And this, for example, in terms of a bump result, looks quite good, I think. I think that could be passable. However, if I duplicate this bump node, we don't need the normal map, so I'll disconnect that. I'll transform the bump node into a displacement with a mid-level of 0. Hook up the displacement, disconnect the bump. My plane is already subdivided 10 times. Let me show you. There it is. And furthermore, I have a subsurface modifier applied with levels of 4 for viewport and 5 for render. Now let's see what happens with real displacement. That looks slightly different to how I might have expected it, having seen the bump result. And in fact, the height factor is much too great. Let's reduce that quite a bit, 0.05. Yeah, that looks pretty good. To see the details in the bump, I'll activate adaptive subdivision temporarily. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So that'll be 0.05 height factor for layer 1, or the mortar. Let's have a look at layer 2. Also needs more than a little adjustment, I think. Let's try the same, 0.05. Actually, notice I have a base height. I'm going to remove that. 0.05 is a little too much. 0.025. That could work. Okay. So that'll be the surface of our bricks with the height of the surface detail correctly set. And we can change the base height using the node's inputs. Very good. Let's move on very, very quickly. Set up a bricks arrangement using UV grid and UV brick. The UV map to UV grid. And our UV brick will use the standard output. I'm going to get some value input nodes, which will control the width and the height. The width I'll set to 0.225 and the height 0.075, and hook that up to the width of both UV grid and UV brick, and the same for the height. And now very simply, the height of our UV brick node goes into the base height of the brick surface PBR. There's our bricks. We'll introduce the offset. We'll introduce the mortar space. And we've got our bricks. Next step is to combine these two layers with a height comparison blend and use the result of that blend to drive our mix factor right here. Very simply done with a math node set to less than. The height of the mortar goes into the top and the height of the bricks goes into the bottom. I'll drag that up here and plug it into our mix factor. And there we go, we've got our materials blended. Now I'm going to increase the base height of the mortar to hide the bricks completely. There we go. And now I'll use the extrusion of the UV brick node to bring the bricks back through the mortar. That'll avoid any gaps in the mortar along the sides of the bricks. And there we go. So we've got our basic bricks set up. And now to introduce the random sized bricks, here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to increase the size generally of the bricks. I'm going to make every brick much longer than would look good, essentially. Something like that. And now I'm going to come along and for every single brick, let's take this one for example, I'm going to split the brick at a random point somewhere around the middle and divide it into two individual bricks, giving me a left brick and a right brick, each one being of different sizes. So to do that, let's get a separate RGB node so we can separate the random color. And we're going to use one of the channels of the random color to drive a value mix node. And here we can enter a minimum and a maximum percentage for where this division is going to happen in the center of the brick. Somewhere between 1/3 and 1/6, I think, 0.33, 0.66. So now we have a random percentage, and we need a random percentage of the total width. Very easily done. With a multiply node, we'll take the result of the value mix in the top, and we'll use that to multiply the width input. Very, very simple. Now, the output of this multiply node is the width of my left brick, randomly sized for each individual master brick, let's call them. In fact, if I plug this into the width input of the UV brick, you'll see the bricks get smaller and leave a gap to the side. So now for each master brick, this would be my left brick, and we've got a gap to the side where the right brick will fit in. So we now have to figure out how to position the right brick and how to size the right brick. The size is very simple. It's simply the width of the left brick subtracted from the master width. Very easy. We'll drop in a math node and we'll subtract. The master width goes into the top and the width of the left brick goes into the bottom. Let's have a look at that. And that's the correct width for our right brick, but the right brick is not in the correct position. And we now have to slide the right brick over to the right by the value of the width of the left brick, this value right here. So to do that, I'll introduce a little more space here. And I'm going to separate the standard coordinates and then recompile them immediately. I'll drag that over to sit beside the UV brick node. And now to get the correct coordinates for the right brick, it's really very simple. All you have to do is to subtract from the X component the width of the left brick. And there you go. Now we're correctly seeing the right brick of each individual master brick positioned correctly and sized correctly. Now we need a way to tell the shader when to draw the left brick and when to draw the right brick. We can do that with some value mix nodes. This first one we'll use to blend back and forth between the original X component and this modified X component. I'll plug that into the combine. And now I can blend back and forth between the coordinates for the left brick system and the right brick system. Now I need the same type of arrangement for the widths. I'm going to plug the left width into the top and the right width into the bottom. And now when I change the mix factor for both of these value mix nodes, I'm effectively blending back and forth between the left brick and the right brick. You can see them resizing and moving. They're not resizing because I haven't plugged in the width output. There we go. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. Now we're sliding back and forth between left and right. The final step is to get a mask to tell the shader when to draw the left and when to draw the right. We want to draw the right brick when the X component is greater than the width of the left brick, and that is very easily obtained by duplicating this subtract node, and we'll set the operation to greater than. Very simple. Plug this into the factors, and there we have it. We've got our random sized bricks, but as you can see, the offset looks a little off. Pardon the pun. I'm going to reduce that to 0.25. And there you have it, randomly sized and correctly laid out procedural PBR bricks. Very nice. Let's have a quick look at one small thing here. We've got our random colors coming from the original UV grid node. So if you have a look at those, they're giving us random colors per master brick and not per sub brick. So we need to get another set of random colors using this coordinate system here. That's easily done. We'll grab the stepped output of the UV grid, drag it over to the right a little bit. We'll get a combine XYZ to put it all back together again. And really very simply, all I'm going to do is to add the result of this right brick mix factor to one of these channels, X or Y. It really doesn't matter. I'll use the X channel. Plug the result of the greater than into the bottom, and we'll use these coordinates to drive a white noise texture set to 2 dimensions. I need some more space here. Let's drag everything over to the left a little bit. There we go. And if I preview the white noise color output, you'll see we're getting random colors per sub brick. Much more useful. Now then, let's combine all of these nodes into a single utility node. First thing I'm going to do is to tie together these two noodles, which both go to the width input. Drag a reroute over them. Now then, I want to select everything beginning from this separate RGB and as far as the white noise texture. Control and G to turn them into a group. And let's set them out correctly. There we go. Let's have a look at the inputs and outputs. It looks a little bit messy here. We've got the first vector, which is actually our stepped. This image input is actually our random color, and that one will go to the top. The second vector is the standard, and the value input is our width, the original width, or the master width if you prefer. I'll duplicate the input node and drag that down here so I can expose these values, these minimum and maximum percentage values. Value 1 and value 2, I'll rename to min and max. Very good. Let's hook up our new random color. And I'll make that the top output, random color. Vector output will be fine, and width output for the value. And that is that node complete, believe it or not. One tidy little node to take its inputs. What's wrong here? I've got these vector inputs inverted, so let me flip them around. Stepped should be standard, and vice versa. Standard, stepped, and I'll flip the order. There we go. That's correct. Much tidier, much more neat. And I'll call this one random brick width. Now that we have our new random color per sub-brick, I'm going to grab that and add it to the coordinates which drive the brick surface PBR to break up any tiling or repetition on the surfaces of the bricks per sub-brick, and we're definitely looking good. Let's hook our normal map up once again, and I'm going to plug the normal map node straight into the principled shader. So we're getting the normal details back. And I'm going to increase the subdivision for a little more bump detail. Very cool. Now then, let's come down here to our UV brick node. I'm going to make a little more space to the left. Drop in a separate RGB node to break apart the random color. Now I'm going to add some value to direction nodes. I'm going to use 2 of these channels for U and V. Into the tilt sockets they go, which gives us a lot of variation and a very nice looking rough wall here. I'm going to increase the mortar, I think, a little bit more, the base height of the mortar. There we go. And now, just for the fun of it, and just because I can, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to introduce the herringbone arrangement. If you've seen the parquet wood floor video, you'll recognize this setup. First, I'm going to make the height variable dependent on the width variable. I'll use a math node set to divide by 2, which means that the height of the brick will be half of the width of the brick. I'm actually going to keep this value node and I'm going to use that to control the width to height ratio. Drag everything over to the left and make a little space. Separate XYZ and then combine XYZ. And I'm going to swizzle the channels X into Y and Y into X. Plug the results of the 2 different coordinate systems into a mix RGB node. Now I'm going to grab a duplicate of this UV grid, but I'm going to be using different coordinates. Drag that up here a little bit, and I'll move everything over to the left, get a little more space. Going to need a UV map for my UV grid, and I'm going to multiply the width input by 2. Now I can separate the normalized output and use a math node on the X channel set to greater than 0.5, and that's going to control the mix factor of my coordinate system blend. Final step is to address the offsets of these 2 UV grid nodes. We're going to duplicate this node because I need a math node set to divide, and the width height ratio goes into the bottom of this division. 0.5 divided by the ratio will control this offset. And I'm going to duplicate that node and change the top value to 1 so that 1 divided by the ratio will give me this offset. Now that, believe it or not, gives me a herringbone layout. It might not look like it with a multiplication of 2, but watch what happens if I increase this ratio. 3, 4, 5, undeniably a herringbone layout. But the beauty of this division by 2 is that the tiles almost seem square. They seem like they're supposed to be square, like the builder or the artist has been forced to use whichever tiles were available, and not all the tiles were perfectly square and perfectly sized. Makes it look somewhat more irregular, and all the other functions are still there. You've still got your tilt, you've still got your mortar and brick blend, high detail surfaces, and everything is looking absolutely superb. And that'll do it for this video. That's how you create randomly sized PBR procedural bricks, all in one shader in Blender. And it's one shader which affords us many different styles of bricks. Very easy to change, very easy to modify and personalize. And something of a modest network, I would say. Not bad at all. That's it for this video. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If so, consider dropping a like and subscribe to the channel for more video content like this. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.